Go into the world and tell every man that you meet, there is a man on the cross.
A Catholic Take. What you need to know right now. A bold synthesis of inspiration and information. Keeping you up to date on the news and issues from a courageous Catholic perspective.
A Catholic Take with Joe McLean starts now.
Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McLean. It's good to be on with you. Praise be to God. You have survived the weekend. Congratulations. You get back at it. Just imagine what you're going to accomplish this week. It's going to be great. Speaking of which, we have a lot to cover today. I mean, we were warned. We were told back in September, Vladimir Putin warned us that, you know what? Russia will be at war with NATO if Ukraine uses long-range weapon systems, missile systems by the United States, because United States personnel are going to have to help them do it, which means United States is attacking them directly, which means nuclear weapons are on the table. Well, guess what happened over the weekend? That's right. Joe Biden has allowed the Ukraine to use these long-range missile systems just in time for the inauguration. Are we talking World War III? Is Russia going to go to war with NATO now officially? Are we looking at a big, massive global conflict? We're going to have Mike Koeniger, friend of the show, on the team at 14 past the hour to weigh in on that. So lots of good, upbeat information to start your week, huh? Hey, well, we do also have Nicholas Cavasos on the team from the Traditional Thomist. He put out some great videos. In fact, he had one just before the election where he gave his opinion on how the electoral map would weigh out. He wasn't off by all that much, actually. So we're going to have him on the team to weigh in on what Catholic life will be like over the next 4 years. What is his opinion on Donald Trump's picks? I'd like to get his take. We're going to do that at 30 past the hour. And then, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of information, but I did discover, though, a Franciscan priest was murdered last week near Valencia, Spain. Him and I think it was a bunch of other brothers were also attacked. Like 7 other brothers were attacked by I guess it wasn't a knife, it was glass. I don't have a lot of information, but I did want to point it out that there are attacks going on right now in Europe and around the world that we're never going to hear about. Pray for the souls that are lost in these attacks and pray for the world to have some sense of peace instead of chaos and war. A lot of stories we're going to cover today. We're going to put everything in the show notes for you. Go to thestationofthecross.com/ACT to get in on the action for the show notes, the podcast, the email list, and everything else, and be a part of the team. Coming up also on the after show, let's talk about Mike Tyson and Jake Paul. That ought to be interesting, huh? Hey, we're going to get started. Please share us with a friend. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thine intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, I fly unto thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And now your saint of the day.
Saint Rose Philippine Duquesne, pray for us. Rose was born into a wealthy French merchant's family in the year of our Lord in 1769. Inspired by a visiting Jesuit missionary, she attempted to rejoin a convent of the Order of the Visitation of Holy Mary despite her parents' opposition. During the diabolical French Revolution, however, the convent was suppressed, and Rose returned home to minister to others as best as she could during the bloody Reign of Terror. When peace was restored somewhat under the Emperor Napoleon, Rose attempted but failed to restore the convent, and eventually joined the Society of the Sacred Heart under St. Madeleine Sophie Barat. After over a decade of other duties, Sister Rose's dream of missionary work was realized when she and 4 sisters were called to the United States. With Rose as Mother Superior, the nuns founded their first American house in a log cabin at St. Charles, Missouri. Though she never learned English, Mother Duquesne was successful in establishing several more houses and schools in Missouri and Louisiana. After resigning as superior, she personally began a school for the American Indians in Kansas, but age, poor health, and language barriers forced her to retire to St. Charles. Mother Duquesne died there in the year of our Lord, 1852. For more about this day and others in the church's calendar, please visit thestationofthecross.com/saints and seasons.
And now your headline news. A Ground News is reporting a 3rd November storm, Sarah, serves notice that a busy hurricane season isn't over yet, just when you thought you were out of the woods. Tropical storm Sarah has formed in the western Caribbean Sea, making landfall on the northern coast of Honduras and causing heavy rainfall across Central America. The storm could bring up to 40 inches of rain in some areas and is expected to pass over Belize before dissipating over the Yucatan Peninsula. November has been unusually active for the hurricane season, which typically sees only one named storm every year or two during this month. Yikes. Hey, the Washington Times is reporting a U.S. Northeast faces renewed wildfire threat as some are asked to evacuate their homes. Windy conditions have renewed a wildfire that prompted voluntary evacuations for about 165 houses in Warwick, New York, as reported by the New York Parks Department spokesperson Jeff Wernick. On Saturday, helicopters dropped 21,000 gallons of water to fight the Jennings Creek blaze that was active in Orange County, New York, and Passaic County, New Jersey. An 18-year-old New York Parks employee died November the 9th when a tree fell on him during a firefighting effort, and the fire's cause is still under investigation. The Epoch Times is reporting Trump selection Pete Hegseth denies allegations of assault. President-elect Donald Trump's nominee for Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, released a statement through his lawyer addressing reports that he sexually assaulted a woman in 2017 and paid off the accuser. The lawyer stated that Hegseth paid the accuser to head off the threat of a baseless lawsuit. Hegseth's lawyer, Tim Parlatore, said on November the 17th that Hegseth's encounter with the woman was consensual and that the payment was made to her because she threatened a lawsuit that Hegseth believed could have resulted in him losing his job at Fox News. Those are your headline news, but just barely. Hey, the gospel today, I've decided to take the option, which is the dedication for the Basilica of Saints Peter and Paul, Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 through 33. And forthwith, Jesus obliged his disciples to go up into the boat and go before him over the water to the other side till he dismissed the people. And having dismissed the multitude, he went into a mountain alone to pray. And when it was evening, he was there alone. But the boat in the midst of the sea was tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the 4th watch of the night, he came to them walking upon the sea. And they, seeing him walking upon the sea, were troubled, saying, "It is an apparition." They cried out in fear. And immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good heart, it is I, fear ye not." And Peter, making an answer, said, "Lord, if it be thou, bid me to come to thee upon the waters." And he said, "Come." And Peter, going down out of the boat, walked upon the water to come to Jesus. But seeing the wind strong, he was afraid. And when he began to sink, he cried out, saying, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus, stretching forth his hand, took hold of him, and said to him, "O thou of little faith, why didst thou doubt?" And when they were come up into the boat, the wind ceased. And they that were in the boat came and adored him, saying, "Indeed, thou art the Son of God." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. The Ignatius Catholic Study Bible would say this event took place between 3 and 6 a.m., suggesting that the disciples were battling the storm most of the whole night. The Old Testament credits God alone with the authority over the sea. Job 26, Psalm 89, Psalm 93, Psalm 107. Aware of this, the disciples marvel and question Jesus' identity. But he doubles down. Not only does Jesus walk on the water, he literally says, "I am." It is I. Ego eimi. The great ego eimi, the I am. It says, in light of his power over nature, Jesus' statement may allude to God's self-revelation at the burning bush, Exodus 3, John 8. I mean, there's lots of references. Jesus thus goes beyond reassuring the disciples and claims for himself a divine identity and authority. Yet another great passage to refer to when the Jehovah's Witnesses show up to your door. Just put this one in your back pocket and say, then why did they adore him like he's God in the boat? After he said, ego eimi, after he said, I am. Because unlike Moses, who has to walk through the water, God walks on top of the water. Just saying. Haydock's commentary says, everywhere Peter appears full of faith and love, he now, with his usual ardor, believes he can do at the command of his master what by nature he is unable to perform. He desires to be with his Lord and cannot bear delay. And in reward of his eagerness, Christ works a miracle in his favor. You know, I got to tell you, every time someone tries to describe Peter as this bumbling idiot who just denies the Lord 3 times, I want you to think of this passage. Out of all the disciples, he's the one who said, Lord, if you're the guy, bid me to come out to you. And then he steps out of the boat. Not a single one of those other dudes in that boat ever put 1 foot upon the water that night. Just keep that in mind. Peter did. Peter was willing to get out of the boat and walk to the Lord. Yeah, he started to sink, but he's the one that got out of the boat. Peter has zealousness. He's not afraid to step in it. Let's be more like Peter today. And when we fall, let's be like Peter and get back up and do what? Cry out to the Lord, who is able to save us. When you're in trouble, be like Peter and cry out to the Lord, who can hear you and save you. Amen? Lots to meditate upon, but let's talk about war with Russia coming in after the break. Don't go anywhere.
Looking for a mobile provider that aligns with your faith? Look no further than iCatholic Mobile, America's only Catholic 5G wireless provider. Enjoy the highest quality and fastest data with unlimited talk and text. Ideal for families and individuals, our affordable plans support causes you believe in, and a portion of every dollar goes to the Station of the Cross. With dependable nationwide coverage, you can have peace of mind knowing your choice promotes traditional Catholic values. Switch today. Visit iCatholicMobile.com.
Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain. So good to be on with you. Praise be to God. Hey, coming up at 30 past the hour, Nicholas Cavasos from the Traditional Thomist is going to be our guest. Let's talk about the election results. Let's talk about the next 4 years as Catholics. What is his outlook? He had some great content just prior to the election and since the election as well. We're going to get his take on this the cabinet picks and what it looks like for Catholics over the next 4-year term of Donald Trump, if we make it at all, because of course we may be on the brink of World War III. I mean, we were warned back in September. Vladimir Putin, he said, listen, guys, I mean, listen, just have a listen to this. This is Vladimir Putin in his own words. Listen.
In the updated version of the document, aggression against Russia by any non-nuclear state, but with the support of a nuclear state, is proposed to be considered as their joint attack on Russia. Russia will also consider the possibility of using nuclear weapons when receiving reliable information about a massive launch of means of aerospace attack and their crossing of our state border.
Let that sink in for a second. That was back in September. Well, guess what happened over the weekend? The weekend at Bernie's, or the weekend at Biden, as some say. Biden allows Ukraine to use U.S. long-range missiles in Russia's Kursk, which means American personnel have to be there to help, to figure out how to press the buttons and all those things, which means America is directly involved in attacking Russia, which means since America is NATO and nobody else is really NATO, it's just us, that means there could be a major war here. We've invited Mike Koeniger, friend of the show, Coast Guard retired, to be on the program to give us his take. Good morning to you, Mike. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Hey, good morning, Joe. Dias Volt.
Yeah. I see where you're going with that. We could talk about Pete Hedgeseth in the after show if you want.
Go ahead.
I would rather talk about Tyson, to be honest with you. Mike Tyson, Jake Paul. I don't know if you saw that, but I mean,
I don't follow boxing, Joe.
A 60-year-old man went 8 rounds with a 28-year-old man and didn't get knocked out and didn't somehow win. That's bizarre to me, but whatever. Okay. Anyway, let's talk about
gives an old guy like you hope, Joe. Gives an old guy like you
right.
hope.
100%. Let's talk about Vladimir Putin, Russia, nuclear war with NATO. Why would Biden do this? It seemed to me that we were scaling things back on the Ukraine front. We were trying to prepare for the next administration to have a peace deal, to stop the killing, to stop the fighting. And Biden is now taking off the gloves. It doesn't anybody know at the Pentagon that this is a bad move?
I don't get it, Joe. And it's interesting to me because it's not something the American people support, number one. We know from the polling data that they don't. We know from the vote, the most important poll, that they don't. This is something Trump ran against, was the expansion of war in Ukraine. And now we're going to authorize Ukraine to use missiles that have a range of about 200 miles against Russia, which means they can strike deep into the heart of Mother Russia. So either the swamp, and I don't like that term, but let's use it. Either the swamp is trying to destabilize the Trump administration before it even gets into office. I mean, we're still, 2 months out, basically. Or they really want to have a war with Russia. And this doesn't help our allies in Europe. Russia's already saying they're going to cut off all the gas supply to Austria, which means Germany will follow soon after. And it's just not a good thing, Joe. And I think the Europeans may have a different outlook when they start to get cold this winter, because the weather patterns this year have not been fun, as you reported during the news. And I wonder if it's just not going to be an ultimately very cold winter. And remember, Russia supplies the natural gas that heats Europe because they shut down their nuclear power plants. So I'm very concerned, very concerned.
You know, when they say Russia and NATO could be at war, what they mean is the United States. They don't mean,
well, we are NATO.
Europe. I mean, it's a pittance what Europe supplies to NATO as compared to the United States. We supply most of the money. We supply most of the materiel. Germany doesn't have a very big defense force at post-World War II anyway. In fact, the German people look down upon the military. They're not proud at all of their military. So this is essentially a war between Russia and the United States at that point. And that's going to be a bad deal for the whole world. I don't understand why anybody would want this. It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever.
Well, it depends on how much you dislike the incoming administration. And you and I would not, if Harris had won the election, you and I would not wish this on Harris. I mean, it's just bad for the United States. But you and I love our country. I don't know how to answer this, Joe, without being pessimistic and saying maybe they love power more than they love their country. And that makes me very sad. It's not what I thought. It's not what I thought. And I don't believe this is Joe Biden's doing. I believe this is the people behind Biden who are pushing for this. I think they're going to hand Trump a bag of bad stuff. And I'm really concerned. And there's precedence for this. Before people think I'm crazy, remember that there are people that were embedded within the previous Trump administration who celebrated the fact that they had scuttled Trump's proposed peace treaty between North and South Korea. And they were so proud of it, they actually reported it in Time, how they had done so, Time magazine. So this is not unprecedented where peace attempts are scuttled by the power brokers in Washington, D.C. And I don't think that means I need to wear a aluminum foil hat. Not yet, anyway.
Well, let me throw another log onto the fire for you then, because there's a report out of the Associated Press this morning. North Korea leader calls for expanding his nuclear forces in the face of alleged U.S. threats. Now, we're not. It's typical par for the course for, bombastic language to be coming out of the North Koreans to say, hey, we're preparing for war again. We've seen this time and time and time again. But I think some people are now starting to think maybe this time they mean it. I mean, we are seeing the heating up of military activity across the Allied and Axis forces again. So North Korea is going to play a pivotal role, and we know they've sent troops now into the Ukraine. Some say as advisors, others say as combat roles. It's hard to know fact from fiction these days in these stories, isn't it?
Oh, it is. And, the family that has run North Korea for over half a century are a little, let's just say off kilter and love saber rattling, probably even more than the most bellicose American political candidates. They do love to rattle their saber. And if indeed the reports are true and North Korean forces are deployed to combat Ukrainian forces, particularly from what I read last night and this morning, they're in parts of Russia that Ukraine pushed into. That's scary because they don't want to lose face over this. Joe, the dominoes are all stacked. All someone has to do is push the first domino, and who knows? Right. Only the Lord
Good
knows
times.
where the dominoes are going to fall. Can Trump de-escalate this? I'm hoping he's on the phone. I hope he's on the phone this week with Putin. I hope he is. And he has to be very careful. He has to mix strength with a strong desire for peace. And he seems, he is the guy with the art of the deal, right? So I think he can do it.
There were reports that Putin and Trump spoke by phone, like right after his election victory. But
I heard that.
I've since seen that those were debunked. That's not true. It never actually happened. He never spoke to Vladimir Putin. So can he do it? That's the $64,000 question. If they heat this thing up high enough prior to his inauguration, I mean, it might be too late. The ship left the harbor, and I guess we all got to go to war. I mean, it's another forever war that nobody wants. I mean, except for the deep state, they always want the forever wars, and we're kind of sick and tired of it.
Well, Joe, my question is Putin more rational than the current administration in the United States? And that is the big question.
That's not hard to
me.
accomplish. Let's just be frank.
Well, agreed. But what is the gain for Russia and Putin if they indeed upscale the war against the United States? And as you said, NATO is the United States, is something Trump's talked about now for over 8 years, how Europe needs to pay their fair share. Does Putin gain by escalating war against the United States? And I think if Putin is rational, he can analyze this and say, no, it doesn't pay. If he threatens, he may be able to bring the United States and Ukraine to the peace talks, and he may be able to have a victory in that he has now taken over the Donbass region and other regions in eastern Ukraine, and they will have their elections to elect their pro-Russian leadership in those areas. So I think Putin may play the bellicose role for a while in order to get people back to the peace talks. Remember, Joe, you and I talked about this a year ago or over a year ago. Russia was ready to make a deal with Ukraine, and the United States pushed Ukraine away from the table and said no. Well, they used Boris, I can't remember his last name, the guy from the UK, Boris Johnson, to do it. But I'm pretty sure Boris did on orders from the United States. So
isn't that
and you and I have read that. So, I think this is a way to get to the peace talks.
What I also find interesting is, all right, so is it going to be a peace through strength administration over the next 4 years? Pete Hegseth, the new SecDev, that's going to go up and hopefully get confirmed, I suppose, when he's not paying off his accusers from 2017. Let that sink in. He does seem to want to revamp the Department of Defense and even fire a ton of these generals who are embracing the DEI. All of that, I think, is good news. And focus on warfighting, but is the focus on warfighting going to signal things to the opposite side, Iran, Russia, China, that it's now or never for them?
I hope not. I don't think so. I mean, the United States still spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. The United States defense systems are the finest in the world. I hope not. We have a very despite the machinations of 12 of the last 16 years of the presidency, we still have a very strong military, though they're not hitting their recruiting targets. And by the way, you and I both said that the military leadership needs to be cleansed and people need to be asked to retire. And
I don't think I'd ask.
Well,
not how that works.
That's a polite way of telling you.
What are we, a bunch of Gen Zers? Come on, no, we're not asking anything. Listen, you with the stars, get out. Like that's how that works. It's just easy. It's very simple.
Having served for 20 years, sometimes you choose to retire and sometimes you choose to retire.
You've been voluntold.
And they're very different. They're very different things. But the point is I think, as a very famous radio broadcaster once said, the purpose of the military is to kill people and break things. And what they need, we need to do is step back as a country and say, how have the actions of the last 16 years made the military better able to kill people and break things? And the answer is, I think anyone would say, not at all. It's actually gotten much worse. So
yeah, absolutely.
There needs to be some house cleaning here, but hopefully we can do it in a state of peace and not in a state of escalated conflict with Russia. And that is very concerning to me. So we got to pray. Joe, as Catholic men, we got to get on our knees, and Catholic women, we got to get on our knees and pray for wisdom for our leaders. And we got to pray for peace. So.
Yeah, well said. Hey, some good news. Penn State Dad in our chat box is reminding me, praise be to God, great news. This weekend, Our Lady was returned to her cathedral in Paris. Beautiful video of Our Lady returning to Notre Dame there. Let's pray for the French to have a reconquista of their country because they desperately need it too. All right, Mike Koeniger, thanks again for chiming in. If you want to hang out with us after the show, you're welcome to come back. But coming up after the break, let's have a conversation with the Traditional Thomist. We're going to have a conversation about the next 4 years for the Catholics. What does it look like? What's his take? He had some very interesting content prior to the election, just after. So we're going to get him to weigh in on all of this and more. All of that coming up right after the break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain, and here are your headlines. And the Epoch Times reports at least 8 killed, 17 injured in a mass stabbing attack in China. A 21-year-old male who was arrested at the scene of the stabbing spree has since confessed to the killings, police said. The male has been identified only as a former student at the Wuxi Vocational College of Arts and Technology. Police have released sparse details about the event, but said the suspect in the mass stabbing incident attacked others after failing an exam and not receiving his graduation certificate. Seems reasonable. But it's also one of several attacks that you never hear about in the news. There you go. Daily Signal reports decline of religion correlates to increased rape and suicide. Well, duh comes to mind, but nonetheless, a groundbreaking new study reveals a terrifying correlation between the increase of Americans who identify with no religion and upticks in rape and suicide rates. The academic Journal of Sociology and Christianity, published by Dr. Philip Truscott's study, which found a positive correlation between the proportion of the population declaring no religious affiliation and rape on campuses. Quote, if the parents want to choose religious schools and want to preserve their religious faith of their children, well, my research indicates that's going to be a very good thing for everyone. Close quote. And Catholic Vote reports ATF warns Boston churches to increase security. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives advised religious institutions in the Boston area to increase security measures on their premises in the wake of a string of arson attacks. The ATF told churches to up security on site, especially during off hours when unmonitored. Yet another correlation: when you go more and more heathenistic, paganistic, and secular, bad things happen. Boston, I'm thinking of you. And those are your headline news. Praise be to God. Hey, I don't know if you subscribe to the Traditional Thomist. If not, you should. Go to YouTube, check them out, the Traditional Thomist, and we'll put a link to it in the show notes for you. But Nicholas Cavasos did some great some content just prior to the election that went really viral. It was awesome. It was his predictions, and he wasn't that far off, actually. We've invited him to get his take post-election. Nicholas, good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege.
Yeah, it's good to have you on. Praise be to God. So let me ask you, just what were your general impressions the night of and the day after?
Yeah, so the night of, I think I was feeling like a lot of your listeners out there, a little bit of the jitters of trying to figure out if we were going to win or not. I was feeling fairly confident, though, because there are some both leading and, I guess, if you will, exiting indicators on predicting elections that people can look into. So I was feeling fairly good, and I talk about this in my video on the subject. But going into election night, we did a stream of myself and our friends, our mutual friends, Anthony and Rob over on Avoiding Babylon. We did a 6-hour stream covering the news, and just seeing state by state fall and my prediction come into place was very satisfying. And then, of course, the post-election meltdown that you see mostly on, I would say, Gen Z social media platforms, places like TikTok. The salt was surely flowing, and so it was very amusing to see, to say the least.
Yeah, it's definitely not boring. It's definitely entertaining. Were there any surprises from your perspective as far as the election was concerned? Any surprises whatsoever?
In the data, not really. When you look at the best indicators on predicting elections really are twofold. One is going to be looking at the party identification. Gallup poll every single election cycle does an aggregated polling sampling of Americans, and they just basically say, regardless of where your party registration is, what do you identify as politically? And for the first time in a long time, the Republican Party was up by around 2 to 3 points on aggregate, which was a good sign that they were going to carry the popular vote. And because historically Republicans have always been kind of the minority party in the sense of the popular vote, that was a good sign that Trump would win all 7 swing states and carry the election. So seeing that, as well as really good gray A pollsters that have gotten previous elections right, dead on the money, places like Atlas Intel, seeing them say that Trump would win the popular vote by 2 points and that he would carry all the swing states. When you put all of those things together, plus party registration being up for the GOP in every state but Colorado, this gave me a lot of data points to say, yeah, Trump is going to win this thing and it's going to not be close.
What about the Hispanic vote going for Trump in a big way?
Yeah, that was very impressive to see, but it makes sense because unfortunately the liberals have this really 1990s understanding of the culture where it's like, there are white people who vote conservative and then everyone else, just because you're not white, is supposed to vote for them. It's called BIPOC, really. And it's really, really cringe and sad because it's, okay, people can think for themselves regardless of their melanin content. Like it's just a foolish assertion. And so seeing him win the Hispanic vote, I think, was somewhat of a surprise, at least when it comes to men, but also not really, because the liberals, particularly on college campuses, have demonized masculinity to such a degree that men eventually I knew were just going to snap. We've talked about a great pendulum swing, and I think you're starting to see the beginning of the pendulum swing back to the right.
I think a lot of people were also on the lookout for the shenanigans that we saw in 2020. And, surprisingly, we didn't see as much this time, although they're still counting votes in California right now. Let that sink in.
They are. And you do, in fact, have some interesting shenanigans when it comes to 3 a.m. mail drop boxes. But it wasn't so much in the presidency. It was more so in Senate races. If individuals go and look at for instance, the Wisconsin Senate races, you'll find that classic inverted Democrat vote totals that you saw in 2020 rise around 3 a.m. from all of the mail-in votes being dumped into the system and things along that nature, which is very concerning. And so I think the reason for that is because Kamala was uniquely a bad candidate. Biden definitely threw the Democrat Party under the bus intentionally for throwing him under the bus by endorsing her very quickly after his coup if you will. And so he was wanting revenge. He threw her in there because he doesn't like her. His wife doesn't like her. And so he knew that she would win. And so I think a lot of the Dems knew this lady doesn't have a chance, but let's save as much as we can of the down ballot races. And I think that's what they tried to do.
I was also very surprised, I guess pleasantly so, that the majority of Catholics, not a majority, I suppose, but it was like close to 50% of Catholics voted for Donald Trump. That seemed like a block that we haven't seen in quite a number of years. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, if memory serves, it was 56% of Catholics voted for Trump. And I think you can see a number of factors. One, and I'd say this is the majority factor, is that Catholics, like all other Americans, want the same thing on the natural level. We want a secure border. We want to be able to go home and feed our families. For my generation, especially, it was the housing crisis that was an issue. We were looking around and saying, we can't realistically expect to buy our own house. Just because, as an example, you look in 2020, you needed to be making roughly around $73K a year in order to purchase a home and maintain that home, pay off that home, etc. But now it's risen up to around $130,000 to $150,000 a year. And when you look in the reality that most Gen Zers make around $39,000 a year, but have around $60,000 worth of student loan debt. This was a mountain that was impassable. It was too much. And so seeing these things, I think, motivated Gen Zers as well as a lot of Catholics to leave. Of course, Kamala didn't help herself by her mocking video that she put out at the Al Smith dinner, refusing to go to that in general, but then also just her history with, combating the Knights of Columbus and then all kinds of anti-Catholic sentiments. And so it comes back in the age of the internet to bite you.
Yeah, it surely does, doesn't it? Christ is king. Maybe she didn't get that memo, but unfortunately for her. But okay, so the next 4 years, I really want to think about the next 4 years as a Catholic, because all right, we voted 56% to get Donald Trump in office, and he seems to be the better of the two options, the lesser of two evils. That's what we told ourselves we voted. But he still is, giving way to abortion. He's giving way to in vitro fertilization. He's giving way to contraception. He has, as far as I know, no plans to defend marriage between a man and a woman. So he's supporting the Rainbow Coalition in that. So there's a lot of issues that we as Catholics should be standing up for and trying to pressure him to change on. Do you think that will happen in the next 4 years?
So Catholics don't have the strength in the United States to really stop any of that. And the reason that they don't is because when you actually look at the statistics of American Catholics, you'll find that according to Pew Research and other firms, 95% of American quote unquote Catholics believe contraception is okay, 86% that believe that gay marriage is okay, and 54% believe that abortion is okay. So our own house is a mess, and there's no way that 5% of Catholics that actually hold all of Catholic social morality are going to be able to turn the GOP away from a more liberalization, if you will. Historically, I think the GOP has been pro-life mostly because of the evangelical coalitions, not really, and to a degree because of Catholics. But we've lost that, and I think the reason that we've lost that, and it's a conversation that I wish that the broader community would have, is why did we lose the pro-life argument? Like, we won when it came to having Roe versus Wade overturned, but then why did we lose it after that? Why are red states actually opting for abortion? And the reason is because when you actually look at the data, you find that most Americans are not where we are, against abortion in all cases. And they're also not Ralph Northam mode, right? Governor of Virginia, who says, you can still have the abortion after the birth. They're in the middle. They're more like, first or second trimester abortion, which is unfortunate. That's where most Americans are. And so I think that there is a lot of hope that we can have on particularly foreign policy, domestic policy, these types of issues when it comes to the Trump presidency. And of course, I think we need to be praying and dialoguing with President Trump. But I think that we need to actually do an examination of conscience and figure out where we lost the debate, because people aren't listening to us anymore. And we need to figure out new methods in order to engage those voters.
I think it seems to me that the pro-life orgs in our country aren't on the same page, and they don't really work together all that well. Do you think that's fair?
I think that's very fair. I think whenever you talk to people, as I have in the pro-life movement, they say, we have a lot of good that we're obviously trying to bring forward, but our leadership is divided. There's oftentimes petty squabblings and feuds between these leaders and things along that nature. And so when you see that, and then you see that in particular, when it comes to kind of these personalities that rise up, I think it does more detriment to the movement as a whole. And unfortunately, unless that movement really does get a grip and say, okay, how can we in our state really reach the hearts and minds of these voters and change their opinion, unless they really start to do that, then nothing's going to change. I mean, they can complain all they want to about the GOP doing this or President Trump doing that. But again, it's like if we've isolated ourselves into a place of nigh irrelevancy, and I say that not as an insult, but just to say, like, look, we're losing red states. We shouldn't be losing these red states. Because we're losing them, we need to do an examination of conscience, and we need to figure out what the heck's going on.
We're going to be at a break here in just a moment, but I also kind of want to talk about Trump's cabinet picks, because one of the things that concerns me is he's going for that more evangelical standard flair, especially when it comes to geopolitics. So it's all pro-Israel all the time. And, listen, I don't want Israelis dying needlessly in the Holy Land as much as anybody. But at the same time, I don't believe leveling cities is the proper response to that. I mean, it's the Christians in the middle that are getting caught between a rock and a hard place, quite literally. And yet the cabinet picks seem to be very one-sided in that. How do you see it?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on the way that you want to look at him. I think that a lot of the discussion in conservative circles about these individuals is either you're going to look at them as I do, which is says, well, there's broader reasons why he's nominating these people more than just on the Israel issue. However, I think that unfortunately the conversation in kind of particularly young right-wing circles has only been through the lens of, is this person a Zionist or is this person a supporter of Israel? And therefore, I think that actually kind of clouds their judgment and they're not able to see the grander picture. So like we'll talk about it in a little bit, but why did he pick Marco Rubio? There's more reasons than just he's pro-Israel or something like that he's picking Marco Rubio. And if people actually, open their eyes and look at kind of the grand chessboard that is politics, they'll kind of be able to see why he's picking these individuals for his platform overall.
Hold that thought. Nicholas Cavasos is our guest. He is the Traditional Thomist. He's got a great YouTube channel. I'm going to encourage you to check it out. You should subscribe to it. We'll put a link to it. But if you just search the Traditional Thomist on YouTube, you will find it. I do want to follow up on this question because it is interesting. People like Marco Rubio, who hated Donald Trump, railed against Donald Trump. And now all of a sudden they're friends. It's a good time. It's a very good time. And it is quite interesting to see like this sort of dream team that he's putting together, many of which used to be liberal Democrats, but now aren't. I don't know. I find it very fascinating. Nicholas Cavasos is weighing in today. We're going to have more on this conversation coming up after the break and what it looks like for Catholics over the next 4 years, especially if there's going to be a World War III prior to January's inauguration. Hey, at least it's not boring. Praise be to God. And more coming your way next. Share us with a friend. We'll be right back. Be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain. So good to be on with you. Praise be to God. I don't know if you heard the news over the weekend in Boston at the National Men's March to End Abortion, to abolish abortion, that they held their rally there in Boston. They were surrounded by absolute crazy people dressed as clowns and other nefariously, diabolically influenced characters. They were surrounded at one point. The police had to come in riot gear, led by the bagpipers, to pierce the lines. Dozens were arrested from what I heard, and it was very, very interesting to say the least. If you don't think we're up against the powers and principalities of the dark forces, well, you've lost the plot. And speaking of which, we're having a great conversation with Nicholas Cavasos from the Traditional Thomist YouTube channel. We're going to link to it in the show notes. We should encourage you to check it out, like, subscribe, and share. Nicholas, welcome back to the team. At least it's not boring, Nicholas. We have 4 years of high entertainment, I think, that we can make great content out of, to say the least. But I want to talk about Trump trolling in some of these cabinet picks. It does seem like Trump is, trying to troll the enemies a wee bit. RFK being an example of that. And I saw it sort of last week. I had Bishop Strickland on because he gave a great speech in front of the USCCB. And some people were saying maybe we should have Bishop Strickland be the ambassador to the Vatican. Could you imagine? Could you imagine such a thing? What do you say? Do you think Trump is trying to troll the enemies, the deep state, with some of these picks?
Yeah, I think he's doing a myriad of things. I think ultimately his goal is to actually change the system fundamentally. Trump, for, whether you like him or loathe him, I mean, the one thing he does have that we can all agree on is an ego. And he wants to see his legacy as a legacy of change, which is what is going to happen. And so when you look at these picks, you see how drastically different they are from the 2016 picks. And the reason so is because Trump now has 4 years under his belt of political experience, plus another 4 years of insane political persecution as an outsider. And so he is picking these individuals to, one, kind of, yes, troll the deep state, if you will, but then two, I believe ultimately to change the system fundamentally and to see it change. And so whether that's going to be RFK and health, actually bringing in some good conversations about healthcare, or whether that's going to be, for instance, Tom Holman on the border, actually doing what the federal government has written into law, actually enforcing the laws that are already on the books, and doing mass deportations. All of it's going to be good ultimately, and it's going to help the American people greatly.
It's RFK, healthcare, yet at the same time, he's pro-abortion. So what kind of health care are we actually going to end up there? It seems very lopsided in their outlook as far as that goes. And I guess that's my issue as a Catholic. I see the world through a Catholic lens. It's the only valid lens that exists, in my humble opinion, So any sort of compromise on the abortion issues, marriage issues, I feel shouldn't be tolerated. And yet we're doing that. But to your point before the break, and I want you to follow up on that, is you're saying we have to take a look at the bigger picture of geopolitics instead of focusing that sort of minutely on some key issues.
Yeah, it's not to downplay those key issues. One should, of course, keep Catholic principles and push those Catholic principles forward. Ultimately, as Catholics, we need to be pushing for the social reign of Christ. My point, though, is more so that our church doesn't do that right now. And unless our church actually gets back onto pushing forward her actual teaching, unfortunately, it's going to be kind of, our opinion is going to be moot, if you will. It's not going to have a lot of force or carry weight. But if we look at the broader discussion, the broader picture of why Trump is putting a lot of these cabinet members in, he's doing so because he wants to change the system and or he wants to push an agenda which is going to be different. So one question that people have been asking is, what is Trump's foreign policy? I myself am kind of a Pat Buchanan isolationist. In Nick's perfect world, we would just kind of be out of everything. But that's not Trump's foreign policy. Trump's foreign policy, though, is not also neocon. He's not a neocon. He's not a George Bush. He is, if you will, kind of in the middle. He's a peace through strength conservative. What he says essentially is, hey, if you attack me, if you attack the United States, we're going to punch back so hard that, you'll be shattered into a million pieces. That's his foreign policy, which helps us understand picks like Marco Rubio. If we look at Marco Rubio is an individual, of course, who ran against Trump in 2016. However, he endorsed Trump for presidency later on. And then when you look at his voting record, he voted in lockstep with President Trump 100% of the way in that first term of Trump's presidency. But what Rubio is really known for is he's not a neocon. He's not a paleocon either. He's kind of a missing link conservative. He's part of that Tea Party bloc that came up in 2010. And he is wanting to push forward an anti-China agenda, which is going to be very, very helpful in economics because our big, if you will, foe, our nemesis that we're going to be having to work with when it comes to economics is China through the tariff policy. And so it makes sense why Trump is going to pick him because he has such a record of really going after the Chinese. If you look at it through that lens, as opposed to just looking at everything through the lens of Israel v. Palestine, which is a lot of people, they fall into that trap, then you will think Trump is just this Zionistic neocon. But I think it's better to look at him as more of what he is, which is like Trump is a 90s Democrat. He's like a center-right reformist candidate who just wants America to make money and to stop, having wasteful spending and getting screwed by other companies and other, countries around the world.
Let's talk mass deportations while we still have a few minutes left in the radio side. He wants mass deportations. They've promised they're going to start that process day one. There was a poll out last week by Rasmussen that said well over 60% of Americans, Democrats and Republicans, support mass deportations. But you know who's not going to support that is the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. There's going to be a lot of resistance, it seems, from U.S. bishops on that. How do we as Catholics feel about that?
Yeah, this is something that I've talked about myself at length with friends. It's the U.S. bishops, if they are unfortunately peddling an illegal immigration, mostly more likely than not for the money that is involved in it. This might be kind of a spicy opinion even for your audience, but I personally think that the federal government needs to prosecute, needs to actually go forward and say, hey, look, if you're going to try to get in the way of our agenda, which is, if you look, it's actually in complete line with Catholic principles. When one goes and actually reads the principles on a sovereign nation state by St. Thomas or something like that, you'll find that a country has the right to defend its borders and has the right also to deport individuals who are inside of that country who have broken the law. And so when it comes to these bishops, unfortunately, they need to really get away from the habits that they've gotten in. And I think let the federal government lead on this issue, at least because we have good people in charge now.
You expect the bishops to read St. Thomas? Come on, Nicholas. It's post-Vatican II.
No.
We're not reading Thomas anymore. That's so pre-Vatican II era. We don't do this. That's not in fashion anymore, don't you know? It does seem bizarre, doesn't it? It's like really weird. Like I lock my door for a reason. We lock our cars for a reason. But we're not allowed to lock our country for a reason. I would say lock the country down. Nobody in, nobody out until we have sorted this thing out. Because it's not just that we don't want people to come here. We want them to come here legally. And we want to have a system in which it's possible for people to come here. We don't want to make it impossible, but the system is broken every which way. It's hard to get here from certain countries. It's hard to stay here from certain countries. And it's super easy to come here illegally. And it's financially incentivized. And Catholic nonprofits are participating in the illegal nature of this all for money. And I think that's a key issue. I mean, shame on them for taking the big paycheck, don't you think?
Yeah, exactly. It's all for money. And if you're an investigative journalist out there, the few of you that are left, that would be a good story to go and to look into of what some of these diocesan structures are doing. And then as far as their theology goes, you're right. I mean, I often say on the show that unfortunately, if you read the average thing that the bishops put out today, 100 years ago, they would have been brought before a Roman tribunal and judged for some type of suspect of heresy. And so we're in dire straits, to say the least.
Go read the Catechism of the Catholic Church and see how many quotations are from Vatican II documents and see how many from St. Thomas. I'm just saying, it's unbalanced, to say the least. Hey, Nicholas Cavasos, thank you for your time today. The Traditional Thomist YouTube channel. If you haven't seen it or subscribed to it, you should check it out. We'll put a link to it in the show notes today over at thestationofthecross.com/ACT, where you can also join us for the live after show, the live video feed where we hang out and we chat about just about anything. And I want to talk about how a 60-year-old man went 8 rounds with a 28-year-old man and he lost? He never even got knocked out. What are we talking about? That's a win every day in my book. More in the after show. Until then, God love you.